Good morning, everybody. This is Dan again. I wanted to go ahead and do a follow-up video to the first video that I did in a series where I want to talk about different forms of red pill knowledge, different levels of awareness that we can have on certain issues when it comes to not only the red pills that we take within the MGTOW community or with just in the men's movement in general, but also just different red pills that you can take as you realize things about society, our political systems, and just life in general. Um, Not that, a lot of what I discuss is going to be some sort of mystical knowledge or anything like that, but just in the sense that there are a lot of things, a lot of topics on which most people are totally asleep. Most people just don't get it, and a lot of them don't want to understand the kind of deeper machinations behind what's going on with the world around them, basically. And I wanted to go into further detail about what I discussed in terms of my belief that there are essentially two red pills when it comes to being equipped kind of mentally and philosophically for going your own way. And you could picture it as the same red pill with two different kind of layers of truth, or two different, understandings, that are involved in realizing kind of why it makes sense to reject social expectations of you as a man and to reject the idea of having traditional relationships with women. I think to get to that point where you're ready and in a position to accept what we have called the red pill as a whole within the MGTOW community. And you hear this, not just within MGTOW, but any other element of the men's rights movement or of the manosphere. You hear, a lot of talk about red pill versus blue pill and blah, blah, blah. It can get to where, anybody who has anything to say is saying that it's the red pill. And that's kind of what I'm trying to break down here, is that it's really important to know what we're talking about when you're discussing a particular insight or a particular piece of knowledge regarding, the truth, basically, regarding what a lot of people don't understand and don't want to understand about life. So, again, my theory about what it takes to go your own way is that there really are two different red pills that are pretty much distinct from one another, and that you can take one and make one realization about life without the other. So I really want to break this down as much as I possibly can here, within reason, and discuss each kind of piece of knowledge and where that knowledge leads. I did that already in the first video that I made, but I want to go into more detail about a lot of the particulars here. So, part of what has spurred me into discussing this as an issue is there's been some discussion among other content creators like TFM and Thinking Ape about whether men and Human is another one that discussed this. I know in some of his videos, there's been a lot of discussion about whether each man is capable of going MGTOW, whether MGTOW is something that should even be recommended to every single man in society, or whether there are men who are just very asleep at the wheel, or they're not capable of accepting, kind of where men are in society, and how the whole victim complex for women is a bunch of nonsense. And, maybe they're just really angry at even thinking about those kinds of things, or maybe they've measured themselves, their whole lives by what worth they have to society, and severing that connection with, being part of society or wanting to do what's best for society could destroy that man. There's been a lot of valuable discussion on this issue, and I think it's very interesting. But, one of the things that really isn't discussed is, well, why would a man want to go MGTOW in the first place versus not wanting to go his own way? Aside from, could each man potentially, or any man potentially, choose to reject the expectations that he has from women, especially in this sense, before you even get to that point, I think that we have to have a discussion about, or should have a discussion about, what leads to a man being prepared to go his own way, even in a hypothetical sense, even, theoretically. What is it that it takes for a man to even consider going his own way before we even ask the question of whether it's something that would be available or recommended to each man? And we definitely, I'm not saying that there hasn't been a lot of material about, what MGTOW understand and what, kind of common areas of experience or knowledge that different MGTOW have. A lot of MGTOW have seen the whole feminism go just completely haywire in its third and fourth waves now. A lot of men have been through nasty divorces and all that. So, I realize there's been material about what, in a literal sense, has caused men to go their own way. Some of our common experiences. But what is it that other men who could potentially, in a hypothetical sense, lead to them deciding, what, I'm not going to be part of the game anymore. I'm not going to live this blue pill lifestyle anymore because it's just going to break me sooner or later. Women have no incentive to be loyal. Society doesn't do anything for me, and I'm just going to choose my own path and walk away from this. Assuming that a given man is capable, mentally speaking, of doing that, or even just an average man, where does that man have to be to go from being blue pill to being so-called red pill enough, to have that level of self-awareness and awareness of the environment around him to the point where he's actually going to want to go ahead and say, this isn't worth it, and I'm not being part of this system anymore. And so that's a lot of what I want to discuss here is, why is it that some men have an easier time going MGTOW or choosing MGTOW than other men? Is there more than one part to the red pill? And again, I'm going to make the case that even just within the manosphere, even just within the men's movement, there's more than one red pill. And, I think we should consider throughout this process whether MGTOW is for every man or not. And, we should consider that while exploring what it is that's necessary for a man to make that choice to go his own way, rather than just kind of looking at red pill rage and looking at some of the kind of side effects of going MGTOW, or, choosing to reject society in the sense of just living up to the expectations that don't benefit you. I think that the question about, whether each man can go MGTOW has to be asked in this framework of, what is necessary for that to happen in the first place, even just in a theoretical framework. So, what is taking the red pill? What does it mean to begin with? Well, basically it means fully accepting something as the truth, waking up to something that, you weren't taught, or in fact, you may have been taught is the opposite of what's actually true. In other words, a lot of men, especially guys who grew up in good homes with two parents and whatnot, basically good guys, a lot of us men are taught that we should do everything for a woman, that women are nice, they're the fairer sex, they're more empathetic than men, that they, deserve to be treated special, if they're your woman. And all of this stuff that, if you've taken the red pills that I'm going to discuss here, we find out later that it's nonsense. We find out later that marriage is just a horrible deal for men. But we're taught that these kinds of things are wholesome institutions and whatnot. So this is the kind of thing I'm talking about, obviously, and this is something that is consistently part of any red pill experience. It's waking up to a truth that a lot of people and society in general doesn't recognize and doesn't accept, and in many cases doesn't want you to accept either. So, it's about not being asleep at the wheel. It's about seeing the so-called matrix around you and making the choice not to be part of that kind of social engineering or that social, just um, lie or set of lies that really exist because of, various other reasons, but don't represent actual truth. So, taking a red pill is waking up to the truth and, awakening to something around you that most people don't understand or don't want to understand about life or about society. So, when it comes to the manosphere and when it comes to the capability of choosing a MGTOW path, of deciding that, I'm not going to be part of the system that seeks to basically use me as a man, treat me as disposable, and then cast me aside when, something bad happens to me. The first red pill that is necessary in this is realizing men's position in society. This is basically like the MRA red pill. The realization that our society is gynocentric, that men are not privileged. In fact, women are pretty much able to do whatever they want and make you as a man or make society as a whole be responsible, and you can see this in marriage, in the family law courts. You can see this with false accusations. You can see this with women still only wanting to be with men who are successful and have a lot of money, and then divorce them and still take them for half of everything that they have. We all pretty much know the horror stories, or anybody who's familiar with MGTOW and other men's content, other men's stories. We know pretty much what that involves. And so this is a really important part. Obviously, this is one of the red pills for getting to a position where you realize that you can go your own way. Men have all the responsibilities in relationships, but they don't have any incentive to really participate anymore other than shame, other than you need to get a wife and have kids and let your family potentially destroy you and then not be welcome as a part of that family anyway, because that's what a real man does. So taking the first red pill is the, waking up to the realization that you don't really have any rights when it comes to your dealings with women, and that society does not have your best interests in mind. That, it's our society, in other words, it's very gynocentric, and, it's really a raw deal for men to take part in a system that, tells them that they have toxic masculinity, and that, they, on one hand, need to do all the things that men used to do, but on the other hand, that they're bad, essentially, for doing all those things. Women can literally contradict themselves and have their cake and eat it too, and just not take accountability for anything. And our society sees this as good. So the first red pill is realizing that this is a bunch of crap, basically. The second red pill involves male versus female nature. It's the realization that men and women are not the same, and that in many ways, men and women are not equal. Now, there are a few things that women are better than men at, and of course, as it stands now, we can't actually reproduce or just, have, even in a superficial or even in just a literal sense, a family without women, because women bear children. But ultimately, there's this realization that's necessary with this second red pill that, ultimately, men and women do not play the same role in society. Men build and create and innovate and pretty much maintain 90% of everything that you see around you. And a lot, most people in our society today will see that as a sexist statement. No matter how true that is, no matter how based in just everything that you see around you, just general observation and what should be common sense. I remember Heartburn did a video, or it was probably his first MGTOW video, where he talks about how, women should build the new building in New York City from the ground up. gather all the resources and, the new trade center building, whatever it's going to be called. Um, and, they should go ahead and just do all the planning, do all the physical labor to, just build one skyscraper, and it will never happen because ultimately, you know, that's not what women do. It just never has been, and it never will be, because they're not built physically, mentally, and emotionally for doing that kind of work. And so there's this realization that you can come to, or should come to, if you're actually making observations about how people behave and you're making observations about the world around you. There's this realization that, women are not equal to men. What men are pretty much all of the engineers, they're all scientists, not literally all, of course, but they're the vast majority of them. They are the vast majority of entrepreneurs. They are the ones who maintain things like electric lines. They're the ones who gather resources through like commercial fishing and farming. Yes, women do some of these things too, but by and large, 90% of everything that you see done around you that doesn't involve child rearing and that doesn't involve nonsense like, shopping and makeup and, all the stuff that women do probably have some degree of better understanding as a whole about, aside from just looking good and making children and raising children. I'm not saying that there aren't women who can do more than that, but they're pretty rare. It's mostly men who do these things. And, if as you become aware of this as a man, you realize that this whole argument that, well, women want to do those things, but, our society just has these stereotypes and all that kind of stuff. It's nonsense. It's like men are just more logical. They're better able to, plan things out long term. They're physically, mentally, and emotionally able to handle building and maintaining virtually everything that you see around you better than women as a whole in aggregate. And so men have all these positions in society, unless, up until recently, where you have quotas and you have affirmative action and all this nonsense that's putting women in positions that in some cases they don't deserve to be in. But, the second red pill is a realization that men and women have evolved differently. It's the realization that sexual dimorphism exists within the human species. And so basically, the whole idea that women can be self-sufficient as a whole, that they don't need the government, that they don't need men, it makes no sense, because men do almost everything they see for them. Look at the vast majority of people who work on cars. Look at the vast majority of people who, just do almost anything. Just the people, who just pave the roads and do construction. Just almost all of them are men. There are some women who can do that kind of stuff and can compete on that level. And I do, if you're a woman that can do that kind of stuff, then, I can respect that. But most women can't. Most women are just emotional creatures for the most part. They're not physically strong. Mentally speaking, they don't have the stamina as men. They have overall IQ points that are 3 to 5 points lower than men as a whole. And so even though you can have an individual woman who's really smart and capable at certain things, men are still going to do 90% of it, because, the differences between men and women are real, and they're not just social constructs. So that's the second red pill. That's realizing that men and women are not the same, and it's kind of ridiculous to have these feminist mindsets that, it's ridiculous to have this viewpoint that women can just replace men in all of these jobs and positions in society. So I think MGTOW is a combination of these two red pill understandings. I think MGTOW is basically a combination of the first red pill that I've discussed, which is realizing men's position in society, and also realizing that men and women are different from one another. So when you put these two ideas together, MGTOW follows logically. That's the basis of everything that I'm saying, is that when you put both of these red pills in a position where, you have both sets of knowledge, you're combining both of these truths together, you end up realizing that, women are never going to lead society. They're never going to take responsibility in relationships, and they're not going to replace men. You're not going to replace you as a man if you're, intelligent and you do your best to be a masculine-minded or so-called alpha male. They're not going to replace you, and they're not going to replace men in general in society. The only reason, essentially, why women have the position they do in relationships and in society is because the state puts them there. But in a state of nature or very limited government, in that kind of society, women wouldn't be in leadership positions hardly at all. And again, I'm not saying that there aren't women who couldn't compete and couldn't be successful, but they would be few and far between. Fewer and far between, at greater distances from one another in between than, to continue that analogy, I guess, that metaphor, than what we have now. There'd be very few women who, could pretend to be business leaders and just basically sink whatever business they're in charge of, like we're seeing a lot of the time. We would basically, if we really did have a meritocracy, which is another subject that is worthy of discussion, if we really did have a meritocracy, men would rise to the top more often than not. So, a man who understands also men's position in society, along with, men and women being different kinds of creatures, different types of human, basically. This man who understands both of these things realizes that society won't allow him to lead. Society essentially will not allow him to be like a man. Society expects you to do all the things that men have been obligated to do, throughout pretty much all of human history. But now you're not really allowed to act like a man. You're supposed to submit to the woman that you're in a relationship with. You're supposed to do whatever the society wants you to do, submit to the state, basically. And then, not give you anything in return. And when a man gets to this point, I believe that he has the option to essentially go MGTOW. He has the option to reject society's expectations and establish his own path in life. He has the ability, he has the tools in his set of knowledge, realizing what society thinks about men and realizing that, women will never be at the same level as him. It's like you're not going to win in a fair game with women. Or you would win in a fair game, but you can't expect the game to be fair, is what I mean to say. Because the only way that a woman can lead a man in a relationship, the only way that society can get you as a man to continue to participate is to shame you, tell you how bad you are, and then, essentially use you as an indentured servant to do the bidding of whatever woman you're in a relationship with, and with, society's expectations of you as well. So a man who has both of these, understandings that men and women are not the same, that frankly women need men a lot more than men need women, just because of sexual dimorphism, just because you as a man have evolved or developed, even if you're just the average man or even a little bit below average, to, be physically, mentally, and emotionally more capable in most instances than women. So when you realize then that there's really no good reason to participate in this system. There's no reason to care about social expectations. There's no reason to care about what women as a whole think, because you don't get anything for it in return, and you as the man pretty much have all the resources that you need within you to live a decent life. This is when you have the option to go MGTOW and to create your own path and to define your own terms of success and all that kind of stuff. So why is it that a lot of men still don't choose to go their own way? Why is it that and I think this is a key point here, why is it that a lot of men, even within the manosphere, choose not to identify as MGTOW? You know, why is it a lot of men who are anti-feminist or MRAs and whatnot don't even like MGTOW, really are kind of against the MGTOW movement? Well, to me, it's because they've digested one of these red pills, but not the other. In some form, they have what we could call legitimately red pill knowledge, but they're still lacking all the knowledge that's necessary to actually choose to go their own way. So basically, if you are a man who has taken the former red pill, the first red pill that I discussed, that you understand men's position in society, you know that society is gynocentric, but you're not aware that men and women are different creatures, that we have not only different skill sets, but again, men are just better at most of the things that matter in society because men are bred genetically to be providers and protectors and to be more self-sufficient. And women, their role within humanity has been to have kids for the most part. So if you don't understand that second point and you're a man who really wants to see things change to be better for men, you know, you realize men have a lousy deal in the family law courts, you realize that men, you know, have all these expectations and obligations, and that women don't have to be responsible for a lot of the decisions that they make. You know, they can get drunk and, you know, claim that they were raped the next day, even if the man and the woman are both drunk. It's the woman who was raped, you know, according to our social and legal view on things. So, you know, there are men who realize this kind of stuff is unfair, that, you know, society really is giving men a raw deal, and that, you know, women are not oppressed. Women have a position of power in society, really. But they don't realize that a lot of this stems from male versus female nature. They don't understand male versus female nature. They just see men and women as being very similar and having certain different parts physically, sexually, that are different. But they don't realize that women are never going to do all the, you know, the more difficult physical, mental, and emotionally taxing stuff. You know, they're not going to engage in, you know, working in mines. They're not going to go out on a commercial fishing boat. They're not going to repair your power lines, and they're not going to innovate and go into the STEM fields, you know, in the same numbers that men do. You know, and I'm not saying that all men can do these things effectively. I'm not saying I want to do a lot of those things. but the bottom line is, out of the men who can run society, or I should say out of the people as a whole that can have leadership positions, that can do the hard work, that can plan things logically, that can create and build and innovate, it's almost always men that can do those things, and a few women can help. I know that's again, you know, from the blue pill societal perspective, that's so sexist, but it's reality. And so there are men who are caught up in this mentality that is sexist, to say that women can't do the same things that men can do. So they do believe in some brand of gender equality, but they think that feminism and our gynocentric system has hijacked what that gender equality should really be about. So a lot of these men become MRAs and egalitarians because they don't see the differences between men and women. They're red pill in one sense, but blue pill in another. You know, and that's a big part of why I want to make this content, is because I think it gets very confusing and very it becomes less useful to say that someone's red pill or not when there's this split between having certain red pill knowledge but lacking other knowledge. And so, you know, men who fall, like I say, into this category of realizing men's position in society but not seeing men and women as different than one another, they're not going to go MGTOW. They're going to fight to change the system because they don't realize that the system is necessarily rigged. I mean, they realize that men have a raw deal, but they think that by just having actual gender equality that they can actually fix all this. And the reality is, no, You know, women need men to lead, and until men are given a leadership role in society, and I would go as far as to agree with Turd Flinging Monkey and to say, you know, as long as women have all the same rights as men in society, and they can essentially use those rights to wield power in family law court and legal courts and stuff like that, while at the same time society needs men to be the backbone of society, you know, to be the backbone of everything that needs to get done, or 90% thereof, you know, there is not going to be any actual gender equality. It's just not going to happen. And so MRAs lack this understanding. And you know, to go a step further and to kind of try to understand why a man may go through this kind of partial awakening where he understands that men have a raw deal. He understands that marriage is bad for men, and that, you know, women are dangerous to deal with in a lot of ways because they don't have to be held accountable for the things that they do. I think the reason why a man can come to terms with that, but not realize that, you know what, men and women are not equal in a lot of ways. They're equally human, and that's fine, but men do just about everything that's necessary to survive as a civilization. The reason why a lot of men struggle to get to that point and to accept both of those sets of knowledge is because ultimately there's no masculine figure in that man's life. And there wasn't a masculine figure as that boy grew up into a man to show him that, hey, this is what a man does. This is how a man is different than a woman. You know, while a woman is just freaking out in a lot of cases and, you know, making decisions based on how she feels today, the man is planning ahead. You know, the masculine-minded man is looking at what tomorrow is going to bring. He's building something or fixing something significant. He is, you know, doing something that allows his family to survive, while, you know, the wife or the mother may contribute, but, you know, she is basically a beneficiary of what the man does. And you know, to an extent, the man may be a beneficiary to what the woman does, whether it's around the house or just being the mother of the family or whatever. And this is sort of aside from the legal system and whatnot that we have in place that can easily break this up. But, you know, if a guy is not born and raised in that kind of stable family unit, even if it's not strictly traditional, he's going to have a hard time seeing that men and women are different from one another, because a lot of the men that he grew up with probably behaved just like women. So, you know, if you grow up in that kind of scenario and that kind of environment, I think that you know, it's going to be very hard to take the second red pill, to realize that, you know what, no, men pretty much do everything that keeps society going, and women are generally the beneficiaries of that. You know, women are, you know, they pay less in taxes than they get back out. You know, almost all the welfare programs that exist for women. And it's not just because our society is gynocentric, that's a huge part of it, but it's because somebody needs to take care of women who make bad decisions. And, you know, women are far more likely to make bad decisions in life, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of planning ahead and doing things that make sense, than men do. But, you know, that's another debate, I guess, for another time. But ultimately, if you don't have a father figure in your life, it's going to be difficult to see that men are different than women and the things that they bring to the table, and that you as a man have the power, and you have it with, you know, you have the capability within yourself to be the prize, to be the one who, you know, has value in a relationship, while women just tend to offer sex and the potential of a family that's not really there, because that family can be taken away from you. You know, by the woman pretty much whenever she wants. So you have, you know, this inability to see the difference between men and women sometimes, and to take this second red pill from men who may be in the MRA or may identify as egalitarians, because I think a lot of them don't have a masculine figure in their life. I think that's probably the biggest key, the biggest hindrance or obstacle from being able to get to the point where you understand that men and women are different from one another. If you've never been shown that, you're probably not going to get to the point where you comprehend that truth about men and women and how they get along with each other and what they bring to the table. So, on the other hand, why is it that a man may accept that men and women are different and may oppose feminism and may essentially have the view that, you know what, or at least have the understanding that, hey, it may be considered sexist in our society today, but ultimately, look around you. Men do almost everything. All the buildings around you are built by men. All the people that are going into useful fields in college, you know, like business, engineering, and science fields, and just anything else, you know, that is actually worthwhile, that actually makes sense in college. Almost all of those people, or the vast majority, I should say, are men, while all the girls major in nonsense. You know, or they major in education and they go and take care of kids anyway, which is what women basically have been bred to do since the beginning of our species. So, you know, there are definitely men who understand the second red pill, that they realize that men and women are not the same. But at the same time, even given all that, they don't go MGTOW, or they're very anti MGTOW, and they believe basically that men should just suck it up, men should act like men should just take the raw deal, and all the other stuff that you see from tradcons. And that's basically the category that a lot of these guys fall into. If they've taken the second red pill and they realize, hey, men and women are different, you know, they understand female nature. They understand things like solipsism and Brifolt's law, and women how they want the alpha male, but they don't get that men's position in society makes it to where a lot of that stuff it leads to, you know, just not being able to have a positive relationship with women, because ultimately, if the woman has the power to destroy you and take your kids away and make false accusations that people are going to believe, and if people don't believe it, you know, we live in a rape culture and all that. You know, if that's going to be the general way of society, if that's going to be the response that you get whenever there's some sort of confrontation with a woman, that, you know, you as a man have a really shitty position. You know, a lot of these guys, or some of these guys who are tradcons, they just cannot see that. They think men should just deal with it. They don't see the position that men have in society as far as, you know, not having an incentive to participate in a system that doesn't give a crap about you, that, you know, doesn't lead to your happiness and your well-being, and that in many ways is just toxic to you as a man. So, like I say, men in this category, they tend to be tradcons, or just general anti-feminist, you know, general conservatives who oppose feminism, but at the same time, they harbor a lot of gynocentric views because they don't see that society is gynocentric in the first place. They don't have that form of red pill knowledge. Again, they're red pill in one sense, but not really in the other, because they don't understand what men are up against, or they, in some cases, they understand at a superficial level, but then they just don't care, because to them, the preservation of society is more important than making a decision that's good for your health and future. I mean, that is extreme as that sounds. That's the position of a lot of tradcons, and many of us know this, is that, you know, you should just suck it up and let the family law courts destroy you, and let, you know, someone make a false accusation and just deal with it, you know, because that's what you should do for society. That's your duty as a man, to provide and protect. So they understand the difference between men and women very well in many cases, but they can't understand, or at least accept, that there's no reason to participate in all this if your position as a man in society is so shitty in the first place. And I think in this case, what's missing for a man to go MGTOW, basically for the tradcon man to go MGTOW, is the understanding and the awareness that marriage, divorce, the general expectations of society, as I've been saying, make it to where you have no incentive. There's very little benefit, and all of the costs and risks are upon you. As Vincent says, why have a child with a woman when it's essentially your child that you're giving to her, but it's not your kid because she can just take that kid away at any time, or multiple kids if you have more than one kid with a woman. She can take your house, she can take half of your assets. She can make false accusations and off to jail you go, and it's up to you to prove that you're innocent because you don't really have due process, at least not in the form that it should be there. And in the civil courts, you don't really have due process at all. So, I think it's a lack of experience more than anything else for the tradcon man, for the man who identifies as, basically just anti-feminist, and he sees the flaws in feminist, thought processes, if you can call them that. But he doesn't realize that, men need to walk away from the system before they can actually, regain any of the power that they had over their lives, or that they can still have over their lives. That being part of the system is the trap in itself, because the system is so gynocentric, and they can't really see this gynocentrism. PUAs, in my opinion, are the same way. It's like they see female nature and they see how they can manipulate it, but they don't really care how it affects the average man. They don't even care how it might affect them if a false accusation of rape or whatnot is made against them, or if they get a woman pregnant and they end up, having a kid that they didn't want to have and that they don't even get to see, but they have to pay child support every month for. So, a lot of these men, they just don't really get the practical experience of it, but some of them have been through divorces and everything else, and they think that you should just get right back out there and participate in, traditional marriage and whatnot anyway. And that's sad, but, of course, there are two elements to this. You have to be able to see the truth, and you have to actually be able to accept it. And that's the other part of it. You can realize on one hand what's going on around you, but you don't want to accept it because of cognitive dissonance in some cases, and so you just reject it anyway. And that's another big part of what's happening, or what does happen with just about every red pill that's available. You have the knowledge available to you. You can choose to accept the truth for what it is in many cases, but maybe you benefit by just ignoring it in the short run, and so you don't deal with it, and you don't process the red pill knowledge. And so, there are tradcons who will pay lip service to the situation that men have, but they don't really accept it, and they don't really care, because they're fucktards, basically. They just think that, you should get out there and suck it up and be a real man anyway, and somehow that's going to resolve something. Somehow that's going to lead to a better resolution within society. And of course it doesn't, and it can just ruin your life, but, there you go. So I think that, if a lot of these men really had more bad experiences with women and more bad experiences with the social expectations that men have, that they'd be more welcoming to MGTOW. But, it's kind of the thing where you can lead a horse to water, but, you can't make him drink, and you can't control what goes on after that. So that, to me, as we continue to ask, kind of as a community, I suppose, whether MGTOW's for all men, I think that's the limiting factor more than anything else. Is you have men who are more willing or less willing to actually accept the knowledge that's available to them. So I think that's one consideration there, is that, a lot of men on both sides, they either just don't want to be seen as sexist, so they pretend that men and women are equal to avoid those social implications, or they don't want to see society collapse, so they make pretend that, men getting involved in traditional marriages is going to change something somehow. And all that's going to do is exploit more men in those situations, really. But, what I want to explore here in this Red Pill series, and maybe I should try to make videos that are not quite as long, but what I'd like to explore is, separating out the various red pills instead of just saying, oh, this is red pill knowledge, or, you know, this guy's red pill, this guy's blue pill, this guy's purple pill. That gets kind of ridiculous after a while. I think that it's better as it pertains to men's issues, but also as it pertains to just various other unrelated issues, politically, socially, or just in life. I think it makes a lot more sense to break down what we're actually talking about when it comes to so-called red pill knowledge, because in this case, I think that you can completely understand men's position in society, but not go MGTOW because you don't have the other red pill or the other element of a red pill, however you want to frame it, because you don't realize men and women are different from one another, or you can't accept that because you don't want to be sexist. Or you can be a tradcon who can't accept that, you know, it's a raw deal for men to be, you know, a participant in a gynocentric society that doesn't give a crap about you, and that ultimately you should just man up and deal with it anyway, and engage in these toxic behaviors and in these unhealthy institutions that are unhealthy because of what they represent to you as a man, because that's what's good for society, and preserving society is somehow the most important thing. You know, these men can't accept the other red pill. That no, I'm not going to do that, because my position in society is one of which, if I'm going to have power over my own life, I have to actually, you know, go my own way, create my own path, decide what's right for me, and that kind of stuff, and not be involved in these institutions and practices that seek to exploit me. And, you know, tradcon men can't deal with that part of the red pill. So I think that, again, when it comes to MGTOW, you actually have to accept more than one truth to be prepared to go your own way as an individual man, even aside from the conversation about whether MGTOW is for all men or not. I think, you know, the question should be, what does it take for a man to get to a point where he's ready to go his own way, rather than, is it something that's available for every man or not? Because not every man is going to go his own way anyway. Most men will not go MGTOW for various reasons. And so in this case, and in others that I'll talk about in the future, that may or may not have anything to do with men's rights or, you know, men's issues. Though, you know, there are a lot of red pills, I think, that we can take regarding political and social issues all across the spectrum, but, or just issues about life, like I've said. But ultimately, in order for us to understand what we mean by red pill knowledge, I think we need to define what we're talking about in a given context, and understand that it's complicated, basically. And, you know, you kind of have to look at what you're saying specifically, rather than just using the label of red pill. Because in the case of going MGTOW, in the case of being an individual man and choosing your own way in life, and, you know, getting to that point because you reject social expectations, you reject the idea of gynocentrism and just caring about what women want. You know, you get to a point where you just don't care what women as a whole do, because it's not worthwhile to you to have any dealings with most women anyway. You know, in order to get to that point, you have to have more than one red pill. You have to be able to have, you know, a couple of different tools in your arsenal. You have to have a couple of different forms of knowledge about society and about human nature, both of those things, in order to move forward with your own life and to, you know, reject the social and gynocentric expectations that you have. So I think that it's important to look into the details of these things, you know, realize that there's more than one red pill, and become more knowledgeable about all of these things that impact our lives. And that's what I want to do. Probably that's the number one thing that I want to do on my channel as I move forward, you know, is to discuss these individual truths, these individual red pills, and break them down in a way that makes sense, so that we're able to better digest them, and we're better able to know what's going on, like with the MGTOW community, and like with, you know, instead of asking whether each man can go his own way, asking what's necessary for him to do that in the first place, and really breaking down the kind of requisite knowledge that a man needs to have about his nature, about female nature, and about the society around him before he can do that. And again, I think it's important to explore that with various things and actually define what this knowledge is instead of just using the term red pill, blue pill, purple pill in a lot of cases and not really looking into what that means specifically in given contexts.